Hello, everyone, and welcome to Work to Game. My name is Brian, and this is Chris joining me as we break down everything that's been going on over the last couple of days. I've been out of pocket, taking care of family stuff, and now we're back to talk about the latest live letter. We're also talking about new versus old MMORPGs, the experience, the thrill of a new game versus something that's comforting and very, very just solid, very foundationally set. That's what we're going to be talking about overall. We're going to start with that. We're actually going to open up with that today in terms of our new versus old. And then we're going to shift into kind of patch 6.3 live letter. What questions do I have about the upcoming release? Which the only thing I caught, like talking with you, because we talked a little bit on Friday, you were on a break and you were like, hey, are you back yet? And I was like, no, there's just no way I'm going to be able to make it back today. Was that you originally thought the 10th for January. You started to slide the date based off the live letter to the 3rd, and then Yoshi P was like, no, Chris. No, Chris. It's not the 3rd.
He said early January, and then specifically said, I see some people saying the 3rd. I don't know if that works. I've been told that it is not uncommon for that to still be within kind of that federal holiday mindset within Japan. So maybe a portion of his dev team is literally just not back at work on the 3rd.
Yeah.
That is not a reason that he wouldn't do a live letter. Like, he'll do a live letter on a holiday. He does not care. He will work, and his smaller production team. But if the team as a whole is not ready for the patch to go live, that would push.
Yeah.
I usually get a little defensive when people start to use the fact that the game is based in Japan as too much reasoning for 14, because they start to use it as this excuse, like Yoshi P is a good developer because he's Japanese or something weird. Like, you just hire insert X person from this country and you'll have this desired result. And Yoshi P regularly comes out and says, no, I'm a global developer for a global game. And the CEO of Square Enix has now come out and said all divisions are going to be now globally focused. So it seems like Creative Business Unit 3 did something, and he goes, that's now the template. Whatever they're doing, we're all doing.
While I like to let's talk a little bit about this. We haven't got to sit down and talk in a while. There is a level of not ultimate concern, but just like a level of like, what does that ultimately translate into? Because when Bravely Default launched, the CEO came out and said, oh my gosh, like this was actually really successful. There is value in them focusing in on kind of some of their core strengths, or at least their historical core strengths. Bravely Default kind of setting that mold, because they had been focusing on this global. Recently, they sold off Eidos, Crystal Dynamics, kind of their Western kind of division. Sure. And so this kind of communicates like two things at the same time. And ultimately, when it is all said and done, when they have the proof in the pudding beyond Final Fantasy 14, that's where I think this is going to be one of those moments we look back to, because like, I guess they were like treating global that like east and west, but now maybe their mindset's all like, okay, we're going to try to release games, but hopefully that doesn't mean that we get less of things like Octopath Traveler and less of like, Triangle Strategy.
There's no evidence saying we won't. I mean, right. That team has done nothing but expand. As a matter of fact, now they're moving. They were originally kind of shared as this is our Nintendo Switch team, and now they've got cross-platform games. So like, it tells me they're just ready to tell good stories. And like, it just seems like they're going to be an RPG developer, and they're going to do what they do.
Yeah.
And that they're going to end at those stories from the get-go are always going to have the budget to do things like localization and translation, so that we don't ever end up with a portion of a franchise being locked away behind a language
Dragon
barrier.
Quest X. Like, that's
right. And where language is the only barrier, people would enjoy it. They just literally don't have a way of getting to it.
Yeah.
In this day and age where things are digitally distributed, it's not an issue of like, well, how would I even get a copy? You just go out and buy it. Like, it's super easy. Barely an inconvenience. But I need a way to read the text that's on the screen, or I need a way to understand the voice acting. And like, a lot of people leave original voice acting on for a game, even if that's not their native language, because there's a lot of tone in the original voice actor, and the second half can sometimes feel like a dub. But then you still need the text on the screen to know what's happening, unless you're going to just be like, okay, and every video game I want to play is locked behind 40 hours of Duolingo. Like, that's
there. I'm not going to lie though. Like, even if it meant like we got Dragon Quest X and it was voice acted, but it was only voice acted in Japanese, like, I would still personally be completely fine with that. I know that's not what they're probably going to be going for, but I know how much Yoshi P and the team put in to making voices work across the globe, right? Because like a lot of the common critique and complaint when it comes to 14 has been and continues to be, I wish they'd add more voices, and they keep doing that, but it's like the work that it takes isn't getting easier. It's getting just a way more, like, okay, great.
Sure.
Why wasn't that cutscene voiced? We ran out of, like, they just, like, they could have if they would have, if they could have.
It tells me they're going to cut bigger checks to studio devs. And so, like, now, as long as those devs keep bringing in results, they're going to have very little looks over their shoulders. So, like, Yoshi P seems to have the ability to just say universally, there's never going to be anything NFT related to basically create a business unit 3. And that's just the power that he has by, I can meet the performance metrics we agree to for our investment without it. Yeah. Now, to studio devs there that don't have that track record, it looks like Square Enix is absolutely going to try NFTs. So
we know that's coming. We know that's literally and that's, this spring.
So like that's what it is. And so I think on its own, it's just a check, and the check is not good. It is not bad. Money is not inherently good or evil.
Right.
It is just a facilitator. It is gasoline on the fire. And so if
the problem is we've had so many scammers
of people like Naoki Yoshida are who's getting the blank check, I think people are going to be really excited. I think Octopath Traveler was really well received. Mm-hmm. And so I would just focus on that because I don't see any reason to take Square Enix and be super upset at them right now. I just personally,
I'm very curious about like their NFT blockchain game, because we've seen so many people just like take the tech, focus at tech first, and then try to put a game on top. And we've seen so many rug pulls and scams that people are rightfully, and I would say until something comes along that proves out that this is a viable way to kind of release a game, like, be skeptical. But what's going to end up happening, not saying that Square Enix's fall release or the spring release for their Symbiose Genesis game ends up setting the mold. But what will happen is that if a game comes along that does deliver, it's a fun game and it's a good system in terms of monetization, if that can exist, then everybody will look at that going forward, going like, oh yeah, like that's the model. That's what gets set. That's how we're going to communicate these things going forward. Because I talked to some devs behind the scenes about some of the things that have been said publicly about NFT and blockchain, and they're like, that's not real. Like, that there's a marketing aspect, there's a crypto bro aspect out there, but then there's like, how can this technology actually be used to benefit a good game? Nobody knows yet. It is going to be a wild west. Right. Nobody has. Nobody has.
There's some cool technology, but until it applies, it's just technology. That's what the internet was. That's what the telephone was. That's what the car was. Right. Until you build something that's actually scalable and helps a large number of people that are not these early adopter, willing to deal with the kind of like all the struggles with it. And I haven't seen it yet. But on the subject of new versus old MMOs, Brian has been playing more and more New World over the last year, and that has been nothing but a continued thing. And I've been playing more and more 14, and I'm excited about Dragonflight, and I'm excited about Guild Wars. And so I think it's cool what New World is doing, and I have an interest in like Ashes of Creation ever releasing, but I've been investing a lot of time in existing MMOs, and these criticism videos have come out of these guys like Ginger Prime about one game versus another. And sometimes what I'm seeing in these types of videos, I think are putting points on the board for or against one side that are not actually a difference between the two games in question. Like, those are the examples.
It's
being
the
named.
experiences.
It's that you're comparing a game in its first 18 months or to a game that's 10 or 15 years old. And they're just different. They're just at a different life cycle stage. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to kind of chat with you about like, what do you think those things are? And like, what are the things that you kind of stereotypically associate with a new game having as its advantages and disadvantages?
Oh, yeah.
And what are the things that being old should benefit you with, but being old can also kind of hold you back with?
Yeah, it's a really good topic. I'm glad we're opening up with this first, because it's also like just beyond New World and beyond Ashes. That is the best thing about Ashes, right? Is until it's actually released, they can say whatever they want. Like, that's the beauty of following that. But what's interesting as well is that one of the conversations that keeps coming up, because the other MMO, there's two other ones, a couple other ones. So you have, Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, which is quietly just doing the work, right? They're not over communicating. They're just doing the work. and you have content creators already kind of memeing on Pantheon, and who knows what will end up happening. I think it's just, I love that all this is being said publicly, because there becomes a record, there becomes the ability to kind of, you know, create some interesting content. So be sure to get clipping fingers ready on any content creator you're like, because when it comes to the future of MMOs, man, nobody knows. It literally is going to be an interesting, couple of years as we lead up to the launch of this. You got Blue Protocol, which they're coming out of the dark on Tuesday morning, bright and early. Japanese MMORPG, Bandai Namco, anime influence style, been completely in the dark. I literally, this weekend, was just kind of like, I don't know, kind of feeling snarky. So I was kind of perusing Reddit, where like 6 months ago, there was like a concerted effort to try and convince me this game was canceled. And I was like, there's just no way it's canceled. Just give them a little time, guys. Like they're not sharing until they're ready. And then now I went back and started looking. I was like, I wonder what, to see if anybody were saying, and they're all deleted. Like everybody's response, like, this game's canceled. It's gonna, like, it's dead. I'm like, and they all just was like, oh, at least they, interestingly enough, knew to have enough insight to say, like, let me get that off the internet before anybody goes back and clips it for content. When it comes down to it, like, the first thing I would say is the impossibility of comparing MMOs, because you can only really compare during the life cycle of where they're at, but people do it anyway, right? We see this happening against new MMOs, where it's like, oh, it doesn't have enough content. Oh, like World of Warcraft is so much better because it's got 20 years of content. Like, it's like you're never gonna launch a new MMO with enough content and enough of that. So a part of being the new kid on the block is a part of like this war of attrition. Can you withstand a death spiral when your game launches, when people play it and consume it, and then when they go back to kind of their comfort zone, right? Because like if you think about new versus old, like there is a comfort in knowing your character. There's a comfort in the investment that you've already made in your character, into that world. And I think that's essentially kind of where the impossibility of comparing MMOs against each other always starts and ends. And so that's why I usually try to kind of preference it with, it's like, how does it make you feel? Because New World does not have enough content that 14 does. New World has maybe like 10, expo dungeons right now, versus Final Fantasy's like encroaching on over 100, especially if you count Variant and Criterion, which is them starting to step into that level of difficulty.
And leveling is not a long-term solution in either game. When you first hop into either game, you might feel like, oh my God, how am I going to get everything leveled? But long-time players are like, you just do. Like it'll shock you. Right now, it'll feel overwhelming, like a monumental task. But like I can tell you on this fresh start server, like starting truly fresh, it has shocked me how fast I level now compared to when it came out.
Yeah, they've definitely smoothed out that leveling curve for sure.
It's really fast, and so is 14. I'm on my this week. I think I'm going to hit Omni 60 on my story alt.
Yeah,
and that feels wild.
Yeah, you will have.
I remember when I started
90s.
the game. I will.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first started the game, the idea of like, they had cross-class skills back then. And the idea of having a second max level character or a third, I was like, oh God, when am I going to get all that done? And now it's like, no, you just do. You just chip away at it. And it just, because you only have to beat the pace they add levels. And the pace these games add levels is little to none. I mean, New World hasn't added any yet.
My hope is that they don't, at least for a long time, because when you start to look at, just to compare MMOs, WoW being kind of the guy up front. Hey, we got to 130. Okay, we got to bring that back. Okay, now we're going to bring that up again. Like, it feels a little bit of a yo-yo, and that does concern me, because they were absolutely right. What is a level when we speed it up?
Levels get too big?
When we speed it up, and ultimately when you only just kind of move that content shift. So, like, that's where I like when you start to sit here and say, who's got the best example? Guild Wars, like with the level cap being 80, like there is that. And that's where people say like, and then the game explodes and you have all these different horizontal things that you can go and invest your time in. But like the strength is that the level is still 80. And so my personal hope and the feedback that I provide, you can increase the level cap in an MMO, but my hope is it doesn't become like, hey, every 2 years it goes up 10 levels, because in 4 years or 6 years, they're going to have to make even faster. So even if, let's say, they level curve right now in New World is nice and just at the right pace, right? It feels good. It feels rewarding. There's 60 levels. Okay, that feels good. At some point, if that gets even faster and even faster and even faster, it's like, what are you doing anyway? Like, I think essentially where you see that happen in WoW, I'm like, make a cap, figure out what it is. And my personal hope with 14, 99. But back to the like new versus old in that regards, like stepping into a new game and undiscussed, like there's so much more unknown, like especially when we would compare it for 14 and New World to me specifically, who's been covering New World like 2 years, more than like, so I've been playing it nonstop for the last year, but then also for, the year prior to that, actually a little bit more than that, just covering it, just generally like curious because it kept going through all these different shifts in its design as they kind of like, well, we were going to do this full loop PvP. Turns out that's not great. Like there's a handful of people said they like it. And then everybody else is like, I'm going to avoid this. So they shifted off that design and more. There's a sense that like from a technological perspective, you can feel a jump in time when you step into New World versus something like, even though 14, beautiful game, the zones and the world, I think are really fleshed out. You still feel like, man, what would Yoshi P do if he had this level of budget? And it would be kind of like, that's what I found myself running when I was running around the game for a while.
Though, right? And so some number of years from now, some game's going to come out.
Yeah.
Ashes of Creation. And they're going to be the new guy. And the New World's going to start to look old. And then
in theory,
something else is going to come out. And then they're going to be the new guy,
right,
and everybody else is going to look old.
But if that happens every 10 years, that's not really a big issue, right? Like that
it is to that dev team. It's not to you and I, because we just move our dollars and our time.
Yeah,
it costs me nothing, right? But the old guy goes out of, like in that theory, if we all did it, if everybody always chased new, the old stuff would go out of business because we would all be chasing new. So like some of those advantages, you better play well while you have them because they're not long-term. Right. They're not long-term. You have to make the transition. It's not like, well, we're just always going to bank on how good we look. We're just always going to bank on everybody feeling like it's really fresh. You got to do something with more staying power.
Art style is also a key aspect, right? We talked about Blue Protocol, the kind of the opening as we in this moment. And Blue Protocol, anime art style, right? So when you talk about a game that ages really well, I think that visual art style is going to be great. Where like when you look at
New World age, really,
let's bring in.
If you shoot us 20 years from now, they're going to look like RuneScape does now. And there are a lot of people that love RuneScape, but you're having to look beyond the art style as opposed to something like WoW that looks every bit as good as it did day one because they picked an art style that's really far outside of like graphic fidelity being its primary driver.
And then again, you look at Final Fantasy 11 as comparison. Gorgeous game for the time, especially on the PS2. Holy crap. Like it instills the sense. And then you still play it today and you're like, oh, wow, this is a beautiful game for a PS2 game.
You have to put its time. Huge asterisk.
For its time. Right. And so, yes, there is definitely that.
Like Borderlands still looks great. You go back to that exact same era of Borderlands and it still looks great. No caveat. It just looks great.
Let's talk about Zelda for just a quick second. I remember when Wind Waker was announced, I was a part of that Nintendo fan club that was like, pissed because it was like they showed off Zelda like in this more realistic state. We eventually got that Zelda, but I tell you, Wind Waker I think holds up way more than this Zelda we ended up getting. Yeah, long term. Like I was like, oh yeah, still. Okay, come. I don't know. Let me know, Chad, if Wind Waker is actually on Switch now because I wanted to play that game with my kids. Like, so it's like, okay, yeah. So there's definitely an art style aspect to it. So yes, I will. I recognize that within New World, and it's going to be its potential there. What I think I like about it a lot in terms of its newness is that from something where you can go back through our history, discussion videos and more, some of the ideas that we've kind of thrown up on the board, they're being implemented into New World, and 14 has either done some of that with our PvP feedback literally is what they brought in with Crystalline Conflict and really with the abilities. Like it literally, I was like, that's great. Like, that's why I think also I like Crystal.
It was being yelled aloud by the entire, like there were tons of people asking for what it is. So they weren't having to like listen through the void for like one or two voices saying it. It was a universal request and they delivered it. The Criterion Dungeons, universal request, they delivered it. Island Sanctuary in a lot of ways was them listening to what people want to get from housing. And they were like, I don't think housing is going to be the best thing to give to you for that. So we'll talk about the live letter after this, but like they've been doing a lot of things based around the feedback. And the point 3 patch is always a really fun patch for that anyway, because that's always the patch when they get to get like UI updates and things like it's when they finally have their feet underneath them from releasing the expansion. Yeah. So it's when they finally feel like they're getting caught up. And they're like, well, okay, so then point 5 should be good. No, because point 5, they're back into the grind to get the next one out. So point 3 is that nice rest on top of the mountain where we get a lot of great like long-term adjustments to Final Fantasy 14. So I mean, the other thing that I think New World does really well is I think New World as a new game, and Ashes will have this, and Riot's MMO will have this, is year 1, year 2, everybody's the same. So like everything everybody does has value and is relevant because everybody can remember where that's at and everybody appreciates what you have. And so you're all still needing those drops. And like New World is further than that by consolidating what drops. So as opposed to having 20 different types of leather across all the different animals, it's just differing amounts of the same leather. But there will come a day when if they want to add a new piece of leather armor to the game, they either have to have it cost a phenomenal amount of leather, which devalues all the previous leather because you're going to need to skin the new animals because they're going to drop like 200 of it at one go. Or you're going to have to let people just get it on day one because somebody's going to have a stockpile of 50,000 of it. Or you have to move on to a new leather and say, I don't want to devalue the old stuff, so we're going to leave that the same. And we're going to lock this behind a new ingredient, which is some different kind of leather that is only available from the following content. 2 out of 3 of those, like, utterly just kick you off into the world of, okay, and then how long until this one goes away? And then how long until this one goes away?
That vertical
and now you've begun tumbling down the same hill that every long-term MMO runs into, with the exception of games that have remained really lateral. EVE Online, Guild Wars 2, these handful of games, the vast majority of them, because 2 out of 3 of those methods are easier. Like they're just easier. And you don't get points for picking the harder one. You get points for doing it right. Nobody cares that you pick the harder thing. Claire and I, we've been watching these shows we watch all these like baking off shows and stuff. And somebody's like, I wanted the extra challenge. And it's like, okay, but they're sending somebody home at the end of the week. All you have to do is not be that guy. You don't get any, like getting second place for the week never seems to work out. So like the people that are always like, I just wanted to challenge myself. That never seems to be a good plan.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see because like, then the question dives into how do MMOs age and how do they adjust to that, that demographic, right? Like right now with Return to Eternum, with the event that's going on, like you're seeing blockbuster numbers. Like the game is doing incredibly well. Number like top 5 on Steam, most played. Like one of the number 1 games being purchased on Steam. So many people are coming into the game just absolutely just like, this is great. And so there's this sense of like, hey, new game excitement for new and returning players. And that's something that the MMO, as it ages, has the ability to deliver on time and time again. 14 has that ability to do that every 2 years with the expansion and all the content. It's like, hey, right, here's what we have for you. Here's what we've worked on. And so if you have the ability to step in, you can kind of like, hey, I can actually kind of consume this. And so MMOs have also shifted to a seasonal model, much to the chagrin of like old school diehards in that regards. And I think there's a strength in that idea that it's okay to take a break and to be able to sit back and say, hey, I'm just going to go like play something else. But that's where like verticality ends up having that double-edged sword. It gives something new to chase, like, oh, a new currency, as you've kind of like 14's been memed on for having like endless amounts of currency, but in the end, they're really just kind of boiled down into, the ever shifting, evolving, and then the tombstones of forever, as Yoshi P calls poetics. And when it comes down to that, like that, there's a strength in that, but also when you come back to the game, it's okay. Like all that stuff ends up being like, oh, did you invest in that time? Did you invest in that time? Well, you just have to understand that you're investing with the idea that that's just all going to go away here within kind of a 2-year cycle. And then it just becomes tombstones of forever. So my concern, especially as New World ages, is that if they go in lean and heavily to vertical progression, it does remove some of the slowness to the game. Kind of its more like casual and paced out nature, what I call organic. And it's just like, hey, you can step in, and if you want to get sweaty, you can get sweaty. If you want to just chill, you can chill, because everything you're doing is adding to your progression. So you get to kind of choose if you want to take the slow path or the long path or the fast path. You get to have that flexibility.
I think you're highlighting right there some of the difference between new and old, because like number of currencies, 14's consolidated a ton over the worlds. Poetics covers like every tome that's not the current two. So when you go compare it to the number of living currencies within World of Warcraft or Guild Wars, it's nothing. They both have it beat by miles and miles and miles, because your currency tab has a scroll bar. And they've had to start navigating, having UI settings that allow us to filter down to tracking only the currencies that matter. Because at this point, that's the minority. And so you have to start adding things to your UI that were never there before, because before there were only 5 currencies and now there's 600. And so you need, can I just let me track the 5 that matter to me. And 14 has consolidated, and they've moved to the same thing in their bag interface. I can choose what I want to track, because, and I can right click down in my bottom right, and I keep like poetics, wolf marks, company seals, and gil. And that's all I want to track. And I really don't care about anything else. I don't care about all my tribal currency and stuff like that. And they've moved things like ventures to being currency. So like the currency tab has also become a place for things to land that are just inventory management, which is always an issue in long running MMOs. Because I don't want to get rid of anything, because nothing expires. It's not like old fish in the fridge. Like I want to hold on to it, because what if I need it? So we hold on to everything, and it just piles up.
I held on to all my triple triad cards, all of them. And everybody was like, just drop them. Like, there's not doing it. I was like, they're going to do something with these one day. And then when they added in the ability to turn those things in, I was like, I just rolled in the MGP, man. It was just like, it was so poetic, because I was like, yep, patience paid off. Or they were like looking at the data and they're like, people aren't dropping the cards. We got to come up with something. We got to get these out of the inventory. They're slowing everybody down.
And New World's already had some of this. For how young they are, you're already seeing the beginning signs of this. First of all, they manipulated the use of, it's pronounced Azoth by the voice actors. But Azoth becomes like this not helpful travel currency anymore, because I basically travel everywhere free all the time, which just totally shifted how I play. And it's like, oh, it's like a waypoint or aetherite system, but like less meaningful. I can just teleport anywhere I want in 10 seconds instantly. And so then this currency starts to become less useful than it was, where it was like heavily sought after in the beginning, and it was a pain point. But rather than try to solve the pain point, they just kind of wiped that clean.
They've already, like, when they wiped that clean, they said that they're working on a system that actually would make sense for Azoth, but they recognize that it was an absolute pain point. I honestly don't know why they don't go with a gold, like a gold sync.
Yeah, but if we're going to start giving people points for stuff they haven't released, then Riot has already released the best MMO ever, and 14's already fixed all of its problems.
Well, I think they deserve points in that regards, because they're literally like, here's the pain point, and we're working on a solution. And right now, Azoth is used in crafting, so there's actually a value there. But in terms of travel, like, it was used for 2 things. And they're like, listen, like, we're hearing the feedback, and it's not working. Here's the solution. And you get to go free when you actually control a specific fort. So if you don't have a fort, then there's still, like, you see it kind of still trickle down. But like, I'm always capped on it, right? And then they're working on that. And so it's like, I think there is points there, because it's like, listen, we recognize that there's a problem with the system. We're going to be working on a new system that we'll share more details when we can. But in the meantime, there's no point in just beating you guys up because the system that we thought would work didn't. You know, I give them points in that respect, because it is enjoyable to get around the world. They've added, that ability to have free teleports if you control certain things, which kind of incentivizes more of that open world faction stuff, if interested. And then, we're still waiting to see, like, what do they end up doing with this system? And that's something that, a roadmap or, a future update would be really cool, because it is still used heavily in crafting. And so, like, crafters end up having a value driven for that. But if you're not big into the crafting system, then it's just a little tax on your teleport for now. But I think they're still being interesting to see what happens with it. So I give them points for that. It would be the same. I would give the same points to Final Fantasy 14, which they've added in like additional teleports. They kept like the moon cost a little bit cheaper, as opposed to, we're like, how much is it going to cost to teleport to the moon? And at the end of the day, not so much. But they recognized also that it needed to be a guild sync, and I think that was a good change in how they were viewing the economics of teleporting within 14. Like, that's something they brought in with Endwalker that feels really good, unless you have a different opinion.
I just think also in your video of New World versus 14, you didn't give them points for having fishing best in slot, and yet we had Skysteel tools, we have a fishing best in slot, we have crafted fishing gear, we have fishing script gear, which is earned from fishing. So, like, so where is that like undelivered content? Where does it become a problem? So like Carby Glamour never showed up.
Yeah.
So like at what point does something become a point and not? Like for me, the universal, like contextually, it matters what they've said. It matters what's coming.
Yeah.
Right now, that's all we have for things like Ashes is context.
Right.
And so I think contextually, the amount of communication that Yoshi P gives is amazing. The amount of communication that New World gives is amazing. The fact that Blue Protocol is seeming to do that is amazing. And like Guild Wars is getting so much better at it. Their recent stuff is, they're just getting better every single time. Contextually, that matters. But when it comes down to like scoring games against each other, if we start giving points to things that don't exist, I think it just devalues the stuff that does, because actually releasing something that works is way harder than saying, yeah, so we're just going to do this for now, and then we're just going to make it good. Like, it's so easy to say, I'm just going to make it good, but like actually releasing it, not pissing.
I don't understand
I
the
get to hear
context,
what
though,
I think is good.
about how you like regarding fishing.
So you're saying they're just going to fix is off. Like they're just going to fix it. Like they're just going to, and then it's going to be fixed.
No,
but like I don't see how any solution is going to fix it. All they've done right now is devalue it, and so adding value back is going to add some of the pain points back in for somebody, and those people are going to think it's worse. Why did they add it back? And the longer it's free, it's going to get way harder to make it not free. And like they are just going to universally piss off people if it's free for 5 years and then it suddenly costs, because of that trend. So you're saying like, I want to give them points. I said their travel system already shows that like they don't quite know how to manage a currency long term perfectly. And you're saying, yeah, but they're going to fix it. But if we say they're going to fix it, like how long do they have to fix it?
Okay.
But how long do you get points for things that you haven't done? Because they haven't fixed it, right? They're just saying they're going to fix it. And so you're saying that's worth something.
Well,
and so like,
yeah, it's a difference in terms, is that like you're hearing that they're going to fix the current system. What they've said is they're going to build a new system. And so whether that is considered a fix or not, like what they did was they fixed the problem. The problem was that Azoth was this resource that people couldn't travel. Then all the other changes that they made, like I give them points because they're listening and adjusting to what the community wants. Like that's a good thing. We do the same thing with 14. We do the same thing with any game when the developers are like, hey, that didn't work out, and we're going to, we've made this change, solves this problem, and yeah, we're looking into building a new system. I'm not giving them points for something they haven't delivered. I'm giving them points for fixing the problem in the first place. And if they don't do anything else with it, like it's a perfectly fine system how it exists. But we don't, like, I'm not putting points on the board for what they haven't done. I'm putting points on the board for what they did.
So what I was talking about was that it's very hard to manage currencies, because that's what we were talking about. Old games have a bloat of currencies. And I'm saying that New World, being less than 2 years old, has already proven that managing currencies is hard.
Well, we know managing currencies across MMOs is hard. Like,
and so
I'm confused.
I tend to see that new games score a lot of value with their community because they feel like everything they do isn't contributing to bloat. But it is. It's just not bloated enough to feel it pushing at the seams. Like it's absolutely still there. We're already starting to see portions of their market board flood with certain items because people don't want those items at the rate that they're generated. And so like currencies are just hard. New games don't crack as much at the seams because you seem to have a base capacity.
Yeah.
And so the bloat is not pushed up against it to the point where that capacity is going to explode. But it's still there. There is still a very real question of like, when I gather green wood in my inventory, do I want that? Does that have value? Does it have true convertible value? Not this is what it's selling out on the market board. You see this in WoW all the time. I found this item and it says it's selling for 65,000 gold. Okay, well, let me know when you get 65,000 gold for it. Because if you never collect, it's not worth anything. Like listing something at a price doesn't mean it's worth that. I can go out and put a sign on my car saying it's $1 billion. I don't have $1 billion.
Yeah.
So like currencies are just going to be something hard. And I'm seeing New World is getting a lot of credit because of people feel like the items I have still have value. But in A Realm Reborn, we were off gathering all sorts of things. You and I were like going and killing like snurble tufts or whatever for like golden, because that was a great source of gil at the time. And A Realm Reborn did not turn into Heavensward until it was older than New World is now.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't see how we know for a fact that a new game is not going to just become an old game once it's old.
Yeah, and that's where I've stated numerous times, if New World follows the 14 WoW model, that will frustrate me the same way that it frustrates me in WoW and 14. That continually, like, okay, we've added new items to go gather and devalued the current base items. And we don't know what that's going to look like in 2 years or 4 years, because New World hasn't released an expansion or what have you. But it is current state where they've added content and they've made updates. We still have iron and wood and all these things that even with the latest, brimstone stuff, yeah, there's still items that are heavily valued and the prices all fluctuate. That's something that's really exciting. I've made tons of money in just speculation and like, okay, well, I've got this item, and with the inventory the way it is, you can sit on items till they're either they go up in value, or like right now I use garlic. It's like garlic used to be hugely valued, but there's more, so like now, like right now people don't need it as much. So I've seen it completely like tank. And so it's like, I'm glad I unloaded all my garlic when I did, because like that in and of itself is a bit of fun. If they add in, like you started talking about leather, right now there's four types of leather that like you can get in the game. And then you use those types to continue to invest.
To make everything.
Right. But the base leather, the lowest level leather is used in all of those tiered recipes.
Right.
So that it's not like, okay, well, I just got the newest leather. All I need is that. There's always, the game has right now had this continual funnel of demand for the lowest level materials, thus continue to have that demand. And that's something that's enjoyable. Now, in 5 years, is that the case? I hope so. We don't need 1,000 types of leather, and the newest and the most valuable leather is locked behind, an MSQ 50, 100 hours. Down the
right
road.
now it feels like I can group them as one. I can group them as items 1, 2, 3, and 4 because I need all of them all the time. So I have yet to. So like I said, leather, and you're saying there's 4 different types, and that's a fair correction. I'm just saying, like right now, I have yet to find an item that I don't think there's any value for, but I don't know how you maintain that long term. When we talk about new games versus old games, the reason old games have gone through and corrected that is because it doesn't feel good to have something that you got now locked behind something that's 10 years old. And so eventually these games have to find a way to make that swap. And you can do it like World of Warcraft, where you just hit a hard reset button and a lot of that stuff is just, it might as well be gone. You can do a Final Fantasy 14 method, which occasionally makes callbacks and it levels progressionally. And so new players are expected to go through it, but veteran players are allowed to ignore it if they want to. You can do Guild Wars, where it's all horizontal, and then you end up with veteran players feeling like they have huge stockpiles of everything, but don't really know if any of it's worthwhile. But ultimately, like no matter what you pick, something has pros and cons. And what new games get to do that old games don't,
they don't have
is say, I'm going to do it,
problems.
but I'm going to do it better. And they don't have to, I think they don't have to put up or shut up. They
don't also have
just
the problems of success,
it.
right? Like what we're talking about is games that especially have been around longer than, let's pick a year, 6 years, right? Like, like I don't know how quick WildStar died, right? But it's like when games have been around for like 6 years, it was like, oh, like the things they came out, and it was like, it was a fun game. People talk about WildStar in a very positive way, but then it's like,
it's like Firefly. It never had a chance to be its last season of Game of Thrones.
Right. So it just
maybe it would have ended like maybe it would have ended like I don't know. Now I can picture him making meth. But
just like with
Breaking Bad. Maybe it would have been Breaking Bad. Maybe it would have been Game of Thrones. We never have to find out because it ended.
That's why Riot's MMO is when I talk to everybody, they're all like, "Oh, Riot's MMO is gonna be great." Because it exists in your head. Like they've literally, like there's no information about it other than it's going to be set in Runeterra, other than Riot has the funds to fund the game. Like you put these check marks in and everybody's built the perfect MMO, their utopian MMO in their brain. And so, that's just going to be something ultimately interesting to see what happens in the long run. But like these are games these are the problems of MMO success, right? And that's the strength that the new MMO has, is they don't have to deal with this level of content. But that's also, from my perspective, coming from Final Fantasy 11, and I see chat like, do I know that I'm biased? Yeah, like I'm biased towards Final Fantasy 11. Like, and I'm also biased towards Final Fantasy 14. Like when you cover a game and you spend so much time with a game, like there's an inherent knowledge. But nothing I've said about 14 is new. And people say, you want to check my old vids? They're there. My critique of the game has existed since ARR. If you guys want to go dig that up, I don't need to rehash it because I hashed it out in my New World versus Final Fantasy 14 video. These are the key things that, from a feeling perspective, that I just really connect with. Like, however, if they go in that real hard vertical progression style, the same frustrations will build, because at some point it's disrespecting your investment in time to continue with the bar. Like, look at 14. Like, the enjoyment I get out of that was I loved the horizontal. I loved anything that I could invest in that carried forward, and that's leveling the jobs, that's leveling the crafters and gatherers. And I didn't spend a lot of time investing in kind of the mid-cycle stuff, right? Like when you look at like Eureka.
Disrespectful?
Disrespectful?
Mm-hmm.
It does not respect your well, no, it's not disrespectful for vertical progression, but at the speed and the acceleration, it ends up just shifting the bar. So you go and how many expert roulettes are there? How many expert dungeons are you running?
I don't run any in a week. I just do hunts. I do 3 hunt trains.
Okay. So how many were you doing again, 2 years ago?
It's 5 a week to cap.
Right. So then, and then 2 years before that, like, it's just shifting kind of the bar. It's not actually expanding overall the game. The elevator goes up, and there's not that much connection in. And it takes them a lot of work, especially in 14, to really go and insert that into the core base of the game itself. Look at the trust system, which is great that they went and inserted it into the core of the game. That shows a lot of work. Like, and the thing is like, I wish I could communicate literally how much dev work that is. That is such a love letter, whether you like the system or not. That is such a love letter that they took that in from Shadowbringers and brought it back into the core game. That it's like, I would say at a minimum, like 10 times the amount of effort than you feel like it should be. Like, if you're like, oh, I bet that takes them, 100 hours or whatever. It's like, no, it's like 10,000 hours. Like, it's an insane amount of work to do that. And I'm glad that they're doing it, but you continue to see that kind of the entire elevator go up and up and up to the point where it's at, you go gather anything in Gridania? Like, do you have a need to go get any materials from the Gridanian forest? And the answer is no, because all of that progression, all that stuff moves towards the wherever you're currently. So you're in Thavnir, you're in, Garlemald. Like, that's where the gathering, and so it's like everything always just introduces the materials. So it disrespects your level of investment. But the counter argument, and to your point, is that at some point you can, as a long-term player, go and gather up all those materials. And so a new player coming in doesn't have the ability to compete against you. That's why that system is used, right? Like, a lot of people feel like I'm saying that 14's wrong, and I'm not. Like, I understand from a global and a mass population of people who like this content, why it's this system, why WoW went with the model, why 14 does this. It's the system that works. But as somebody who's coming from Final Fantasy 11, like, I like the game that you can go and sit down and you can kind of just exist in the world. It's more of a metaverse than it is a theme park. I'm not a big theme park guy. And I've stated that even about World of Warcraft 2. I was like trying to get into it, and I can't. And I was like, the only thing that carried me through with 14 was Final Fantasy as a brand, was the story as a brand. Outside of those two things, the theme park model just isn't personally attractive to me. And that's not to say it's bad. It's to say I'm in the minority. And a lot of people seem to want to be convincing me that I'm wrong. It's like, I'm sorry. Like, I just happen to like,
hold on. You're jumping points too fast.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You're jumping points too fast. So your initial point was about the devaluing time was, why would I ever be in the Shroud? And I was in the Shroud last week because I have goals that require I go to the Shroud. So the idea that the reset devalues time sounds like if things I've done in the past do not provide value in some time in the future, that those are disrespectful of my investment in that material. But I think I would back that up to, like, what is the core reason we play video games?
Okay.
Because last weekend I watched TCU from our very own DFW play against those filthy orange guys down in the South, the Longhorns. And As a tech fan, it's anytime I can watch the Longhorns get beat up for any portion of a
Any
game,
portion, yeah.
it's just
The
delightful.
only time I root for the Longhorns is whenever it's a non-Texas team. So it's like, it's like, all right, we'll just go Texas.
And even though as Dallas people, like, even then it's like, well, but like OSU is closer to us anyway. So like even then it's so yeah. So as I watched that, I learned about the teams, I learned about the coaches, I learned about the status of kind of what those teams have been doing over the season because I don't catch all their games. But all that knowledge isn't going to help me with anything. It's not going to move my life forward in any way. It's not this. I honestly shocks me that I get to bring it up in conversation at all. It's just something that I yeeted my time into, and then I don't get that time back. And that's how MMOs feel to me, is that I'm yeeting my time in for the value of the value. That's it. That's it. And so there is this idea of like, if a game releases at $60 and then 2 years later it releases, they drop the price to $20, did they screw you out of $40? No. You paid $60 to be entertained on the day that you paid $60. And whether it goes up or down later, whether that experience is good or later, Amazon could come out tomorrow and say, hey, we've been chatting with our friends over at the Google Glass team, and we just realized it's so much more fun to cancel things than to keep running things.
Exactly.
New World is going offline effective immediately. And it did not devalue your time because you've enjoyed the journey. Mm-hmm. And so vertical progression or horizontal progression, regardless, I think some of where I was drawing a disagreement with your statement is that there is something they get to do that decides whether or not I'm having fun. And as somebody that was copied in tweets this weekend about whether or not people can skip story in 14 and still have a good time because other people get to gatekeep, I guess. No, like as long as you're having fun, neither game gets to disrespect your time as long as when you're logging in, you're having fun. Where the disrespect time comes in my opinion, is are they locking the fun behind not fun activities?
Yeah. The thing is that the here's a key difference in disrespecting time. The 14 is that's where I hear a lot, the respect your time. 14 would be a game that falls under that. I look at it and say, does it respect your investment? And that's essentially a different kind of avenue, and it's not shared with the time. So you brought up the time aspect. 14 is a game that respects your time. The investment is that what you as a player spend more time doing, and then does that investment pay off in the long run? Destiny is a good example of this. Destiny doesn't respect your time in terms of power, but it respects your investment in terms of your guns and that kind of thing. So why go do a raid in Destiny? It's like, well, you can get a gun that is only in that raid, and then you can still continue to power that gun up. So your investment in going to acquire said item ends up paying out over the long run, and then you have balance adjustments and things like that. So that's where these two kind of things, vertical and horizontal, come in. Vertical design respects your time because it allows you to pick up, play, enjoy, and that experience, and then set it down, and then come back and pick up and play and enjoy that experience. You're not punished for taking that break. But a horizontal, in terms of an investment, like that could essentially disrespect your time. But overall, the more time that you're able to invest in the game itself has a more satisfying payoff. And so what I look for in that regards is a game that does that very, very thing. And that's just essentially a preference, right? And it's a preference that is in the minority of games, because that's why you see Final Fantasy 14 so successful and WoW so successful, because the reality is not a lot of people have the interest in spending a lot of, of their invest in deeply into these systems, because they want to go and should have the right to go play other games. But that doesn't change how that makes me feel and how I enjoy my time being spent. Does that make sense?
So to shift the word from time to investment, now the argument is whether or not the game allows you to take breaks as part one, and what is asked of a newer player.
Okay.
Because like Final Fantasy 14, getting caught up on the story, it would be way easier for you to come back at 7.0 than for somebody to start at 7.0, because you're still going to have everything you have. You're going to have all the knowledge of how the systems work. You're going to have all the knowledge of how that works. You're going to adjust very quickly because they've proven they never changed that much at one time. And your character is going to have already cleared everything up to Endwalker, which is going to mean you're basically straight into the expansion, give or take a couple of patch cycles. And as opposed to somebody having to start in a Realm Reborn. It's hundreds of hours of story, and you have a ton of story knowledge and things like that like I've had to loop back for. And as a longtime player, to have to loop back and try to get that story knowledge has been a huge investment of time. So I think you're comparing to like, well, how much is somebody who has not invested getting versus how much am I? So like, what did my time kind of buy me? And then how easy is it to maintain that? As far as like, can I easily take breaks from the game? If I take a break, do I come back and everything's right where I left it? Or do I take a break and I came back and my house kind of crumbled while I was away? And so that seems to be kind of the 2 points you're saying are the important ones.
Yeah. Well, and that's just, again, they're not important at all. They're just preferential. And that's the point that
I'm talking to you. Yeah.
So it's like, what is the ultimate preference that a player has? And it's that, are you looking for the theme park? Are you looking for something where you can kind of jump in, get accustomed to it, and take breaks? Or are you looking for something more to kind of settle into and exist in? And it's essentially when you kind of, the only term I can think of now is, are you looking for a metaverse? Or are you looking for, a theme park? And that's where it's like, does these MMOs, do these games offer that level of experience of kind of existing and persisting versus something that's more designed to be able to kind of have this consumable aspect to it? And that's just the difference, right? Does that, and so I use that term because that's kind of the hot word that people are using. But when you look at the original MMORPGs, they were in fact that, like, there wasn't so much, like in the way. They were Wild West, but they existed as these metaverses before social media and all these things. And we've seen kind of like the ebb and flow and the evolution. And so what New World, in terms of its newness, and who knows, like, again, fast forward 5-10 years from now, it could easily go that way, that we've seen like the modern MMO go. That would be something that would frustrate me. That would be something that when I look back at it, I'd be like, bummer that happened, but it makes sense that it does. But right now, what it gives me is, it gives me this essentially the same emotional kind of connection that Final Fantasy XI did. And I didn't expect that it would do that. I was thinking New World's going to struggle. Like, I thought it was going to get down to 5,000 concurrent. Like, I was just like, there's just no way this game's going to resonate with that many people. And I think it does. I think it ends up, what I keep hearing from a lot of players is that what I echo and what I express is in the minority, but there's definitely a minority of people who are like, yeah, like, this really feels like what MMOs used to kind of resonate. And the question we don't know is that does it follow the same trajectory as what we consider the modern vertical or progression systems?
So I think we've wildly drifted off of new versus old and 14 versus New World, and more about how you consume content. Because Final Fantasy 14, if you're willing to just kind of like take the gear as it's handed to you and always be, like 6.3 is just going to just hand you a bunch of gear that's all of a sudden making 6.2 not seem so great. And then 6.4 is going to do this, and it's going to just keep moving it forward. And so it just kind of slowly marches on. The story is only, on average, let's say an hour a month, because you basically get a new story patch every 4 months. And let's say they're about 4 hours long. So you're putting on average about 12 hours a year into maintaining story. And then every other year you get a big chunk all at once and you have a single player RPG. But the rest of the time, you're kind of just putting in your hour per month. After that, gearing is really easy as long as you don't want to be the tip top. To climb up to like the midpoint on the mountain is almost just handed to you. So after that, it's a question of, what do you want to do? Do you want to go get involved in the RP scene? Do you want to go get involved in maps and hunts? And like, I'm off in the Shroud gathering all sorts of stuff. And New World, I think, is the same way. So in New World, you're saying you can come and go, but I imagine if you want to have territory ownership, that's not the case. I imagine if you want to start engaging in the very top end of what New World has to offer in the open world PvP scene, in the people who are truly like crushing the market, not just making what's good money relative to them, but truly manipulating markets on an EVE Online scale.
Yeah.
I have a feeling those people start to be like Ash 10, where they have turned that into their end game, and it requires a constant maintenance. And if they were to go take 3 months off, they would come back and have to rebuild their empire. So I think you're starting to, some of the examples you're using, they're not new versus old. It's that you're in a game that's new to you, but somebody who played New World for the first 5 years of it and then discovered Final Fantasy 14 3 years from now, would have all the same feelings you're having,
and they should absolutely do that.
because it would be new to them. So now it's new versus old for the individual player, which means at any given time, any game can be new to somebody.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to clarify one thing because I see I'm probably going to butcher the name. C Strife saying that I'm saying that 14 devs don't listen. Not at all. Like, they do. But I've said this multiple times. The things that I wish that they would implement don't make sense in 14 and actually would cause too much strife. So there's an important aspect that they're not. They're saying they could. Then a perfect answer for 14's dev team is to say no. And, you know, in that regards, it's a perfectly fine answer because of the years of how they've already kind of set the mold. Like, if they were going to go and like redo the gear system and like add in perks, that would cost too much. A, it'd be too much work. But then B, I don't think it would be received well by the team itself, unless they decided to go with a 14.2 or a new MMORPG. But I just to kind of clarify that, like, no, they listen. The fact is we got Criterion, the fact that we got all these other systems.
You and I haven't talked about the live letter yet. They did a ton of stuff, man.
Yeah, so they continue to. Well, we'll have to talk about that like on Wednesday because I got to get to work now. So
it's a great live letter.
Oh yeah, cool, guys. We're gonna talk about the live letter and stuff more next time. Go hang out with Chris while he's live over on Twitch today. He's got lots going on. Thanks so much for joining us for the live show. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and hopefully we'll see you back here next Wednesday for the next live show. But more on that soon. So thanks guys for being here. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful day. Hopefully we'll see you next time, but take care.